Recording is on.
All right, welcome everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is May 3rd, and this is our Metropolitan Water District Caucus meeting, as well as a special meeting of the Board of Directors of West Basin. So if our staff could please do roll call to determine a quorum.
Yes, thank you very much, President Houston. We'll begin with Director Don Deere, Director Gloria Gray,
Here.
Director Harold Williams, Director Desi Alvarez, and President Scott Houston.
Here. Okay, so we don't have a quorum, but we can still continue with these items. So is there anyone from the public who's wishing to speak at this time?
President Houston, we have not received any requests for a public comment.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, let's move on to our discussion items, which is 4A. Development of a climate adaptation master plan for water.
Yes, thank you very much, President Houston. The items before you today, I think, are the most timely presentations that we could have asked for from Metropolitan Water District. We are very lucky to have a top A+ team from Metropolitan Water District here to present to our board of directors, as well as our staff and our guests. And as you mentioned, we do have our first item related to our climate action master plan. And I know that Elizabeth Croson, the Chief Sustainable Resilience and Innovation Officer, is here for this presentation. So I'll throw that over to you. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, and good afternoon, President Houston and members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here today at West Basin. Thank you for having me. And I'm here to talk through the process and the next steps that we are following for developing a climate adaptation master plan for Metropolitan and for our member agencies. This is a collaborative process that was kicked off at the February board retreat that I know several of you attended. Next slide, please. So just to give a little context of that retreat, we really focused on the climate vulnerabilities and impacts that we are seeing in our service area at the retreat. And the retreat was really around, let's come to some common understanding about the problem itself that we're trying to tackle. Metropolitan has a long history of doing integrated resources planning, and the way that we've approached that has evolved every time we do it based on additional information, additional science, and new modeling tools. And that's, again, what's happening here is that we're building on what we've done in the past, and we're, instead of limiting ourselves to the data that we have historically, we're really trying to think forward looking and to the uncertainties around climate change and to not only drought cycles, but also other climate impacts that will affect our water supply sources as well as our infrastructure and operations. So thinking about extreme heat, Bill Hazenkamp talked about how extreme heat is impacting the Colorado River Basin, for example, at the board retreat. We are looking at wildfire impacts. We've certainly seen flood following wildfire can impact sedimentation and operations at some of our facilities, including places like Castaic Lake. And so that's the kind of information that we are trying to incorporate into this approach to an adaptation plan that will not only include our resources planning, but also our financial planning and inform us as we explore additional business model options. Next slide, please. So some of the board objectives that came out of the board retreat, this is just kind of the steps that we've been pursuing. And again, this is really a board-driven process, but it's one that as staff, we have been sort of organizing ourselves around helping to implement this plan in partnership with the board, and certainly looking for every possible way to incorporate the input of our member agencies. So this first step is really determining some mutual understanding around these key terms. And we've tried to kind of move away from saying we're going to define these terms, because I think coming up with a formal definition that we all would agree to could take a really long time. And so what we really want to do is just come to some common understanding about the way that we use these terms, how we apply them in practice, what reliability means to all of us, what resilience means. We may not have used that word resilience in the past. We may have used system capacity or flexibility or adaptability. But really just trying to get some common understanding about what these words, what these themes really mean to our operations and delivering our core mission of safe and reliable water. And then the board also discussed developing some criteria that will help us evaluate some potential pathways for our investments. And one of the key elements, in addition to, resources and infrastructure and operations, is are we meeting the organizational needs that will be required to implement these actions? Do we have the right workforce in place? What types of training or workforce development do we need to do? And same goes for how we finance and set up our rate structures. Next slide, please. So this is the process. I know that all the board members have at least seen this a couple times, maybe even a couple times today. I see you. So we are in these blue pillars here, where we're really talking about these key core principles and coming to some common understanding around those. And then we will move into developing criteria and some pathways. This is a 12-month process. So we are hoping to have something in Q1 of 2024. That won't necessarily be a static plan that says, hey, these are all the investments that we all plan to make. What it will hopefully include is a decision-making framework that can inform future investments, but also that can identify some near-term, no regrets types of projects that we know we need to move on urgently. And, a lot of this is coming from what we've known we've needed to do for a while, but it's also certainly due to what's happened in the state water dependent areas. And so we know that there's some immediate actions that we need to take there, especially. Next slide. So we have two board workshops coming up in May and in June. These are the fourth Tuesdays. So these are hosted by the long-term planning processes and business model subcommittee. And so you can see the themes of those are, again, terminology and interests. And then the second one there is really focused on member agencies and ensuring that the planning process that we are embarking on is adequately incorporating member agency planning processes. A lot of your planning processes have been incorporated into the needs assessment through the first phase of the IRP, but we want to make sure that all of the planning processes are acknowledged and that we can then identify the gaps and start taking next steps. Next slide, please. This slide is really just to show you that we are, as a team, we're trying to be really thoughtful about the sequencing of our conversations, because it is critical that we have member agency input along the way. So those sort of light, or I guess mid blue, bright blue slides, that's member agency input. The dark blue are board workshops. So, and those orange slides are our progress reports to our subcommittee. So really trying to sequence things to ensure that we're getting member agency input before workshops, debriefing with them after workshops. And so that this iterative process, which is on a very urgent and accelerated time schedule, is as inclusive as possible. Also important to note that we're developing a public engagement strategy, and so that will be a part of this process as well. And we're working closely with our external affairs team to do that. And there will be a discussion on that at I think it'll be the first public affairs subcommittee meeting coming up in June. Next slide. So a little bit more about this next workshop that's coming up quickly here. The proposed agenda is that Metropolitan staff present on these terms and how we at Metropolitan have really been using these terms in practice, with some examples. And we've already started to share some of our initial thoughts with the member agencies at a member agency manager meeting last week. And so, and again, I think that it's probably, not going to be any surprise how we're thinking about reliability and financial sustainability. We talk about that a lot, But resilience and affordability are places where I think it's going to take a lot more discussion, and there's a lot of different ways to interpret those terms. And so that's why I think this exercise is useful, so that we can come to some common understanding and hopefully develop some clear criteria around how do we evaluate projects to ensure that they are resilient. What does that mean? Are we talking about drought resilience? Are we talking about seismic resilience, financial resilience, workforce resilience? So really trying to think about how we weight those criteria in our decision making. We are going to also have a session on the member agency input that we get. So like I mentioned, we had a meeting last week with the member agencies. We are developing a questionnaire that will go out either this afternoon or tomorrow that is asking for additional input from your member agencies, so that the board can really have a robust discussion around this. So it'll be a professionally facilitated workshop. Really looking forward to that. Next slide, please. This just goes into a little bit more detail of some of the questions that we'll be addressing and some of the questions we're asking of member agencies. And again, just that we want to make sure that all this information is provided to the board. And also expecting that board members will have obviously their own conversations with their member agencies as well. Next slide, please. And then just to just let you know that there are these other efforts going on that are related. First of all, we have developed a planning team within Metropolitan staff. I think, you know, everybody recognizes the high caliber folks we have on staff. And so we've drawn some of our leaders within engineering and operations and resources and across the agency to have this conversation and to help facilitate this process with the board. We are bringing on some technical consultants and facilitators. There's also an ongoing climate vulnerability and risk assessment so that we can more comprehensively understand some of the key vulnerabilities that we have in our service area and how we might address them. And as Metropolitan, you know, often does, there are always ongoing studies as we try to look for additional solutions that are available to our current challenges around storage and conveyance, around stormwater capture, ocean and brackish desal, and of course, Pure Water Southern California, which we'll discuss later today. There's also a whole effort going on in our power systems operations team. They are undergoing an energy sustainability plan where they're looking at some opportunities for new power sources. This is, you know, this is intricately related to this effort because a lot of the adaptation that we need to do is related to where we're going to get our power and how we're going to do that in a way that's affordable. Even in our operations on the CRA, I think you are all aware that we've seen, you know, decreased power availability from Hoover and increases in the cost of things like natural gas at times. And so we're really looking for ways that we might be able to provide a more sustainable, both in terms of financial, but also environmental sustainability in our energy supply. And then, like I mentioned, a public engagement strategy. Next slide, please. So this is really just an opportunity if you have additional input, any additional information that would be helpful as you all contemplate and engage in this process. It is an expedited schedule. We are going to be moving quickly and meaningfully, but I think in a lot of ways, a lot of the different activities that are going on in Metropolitan do feed into this process, whether they're specific projects or budget development or our CIP process. And so we are really looking for additional input and discussion from all of you today or at any point. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz, for being here and for this timely presentation. And I do want to open it up to folks in 1 second, but I've got a question, and this would probably be to EJ in this case. So when we're working with Metropolitan as a member agency on this, are we somehow also communicating to our local retailers, especially some of the cities that run their own water departments, EJ, to get their input that we're translating back up to Metropolitan?
We do that on a couple of different fronts. I think the most effective of which is our the West Basin Water Association briefings. Not only do we provide a written update, but we also provide an oral update at each specific meeting. We try to highlight all the different issues that Metropolitan Water District is discussing, and then of course provide information as to the activities that are taking place at Med. We always invite feedback from our individual retailers. Some of that happens on the one-on-ones. For instance, after our last meeting, we met with LA County Water Board 29, but we're always soliciting information, whether it be through the Water Association, one-on-ones, and then of course our quarterly updates as well.
Just because, unfortunately, again, a lot of them are not here today, but I do think it's really important that if it's, say, the city of Lamega, the city of Manhattan Beach, the city of El Segundo, some of the ones that, city of Inglewood that are doing their own work, that they're hopefully understanding. What are we hearing from them that kicks up to West Basin that goes to Metropolitan in this? So I think that we need to make sure somehow we're engaging them. You know, one thing about it, and Liz, you may or may not realize it, but this year, my sort of theme for West Basin is actually resilience. So I love the fact that you're using that word in all of this. And I think that that's what we're all trying to make sure coming out of the pandemic and coming out of all the challenges we had. And yet now with all the craziness of our climate, that we have no other choice but to deal with resilience and sustainability. So this is extremely timely. I have a couple of thoughts to give to you or ask, but first I do want to open up. With that, Director Gray, I do hear you. Do you have a question or comment? Go ahead.
Just a minute. I wanted to thank Liz Crossom for the presentation, and I agree the information really needs to get out and coordinated with our different cities and those stakeholders to make sure that information get out. But thank you, Liz, for the presentation information this morning or afternoon.
Thank you, Director Gray.
Great, thank you, Director Gray. Okay, so anyone who's in the room who has, I saw EJ or
I would defer to our director.
Dave. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so actually, I have, this is the Met. The Met is huge. And we have, there's an awful lot of regional activities and even in a city activities. How are you bringing those up into the resilience, because it's pretty important for resilience, and how do you bring that in?
Well, and I think this is to your point too, and how critical it is that as we develop these processes that we figure that out. I mean, there are so many different layers of water agencies, and it really is Met's intent to build regional resilience. And so that doesn't just mean our infrastructure. It means how do we help our member agencies and their members and their retailers be part of this regional resilience effort. And that bigger piece is probably not what's going to happen in this first year, I would say, but it's absolutely part of what is within our mission. And so, you know, I think that what we are trying to do from a technical standpoint is really develop a decision-making tool that can help us evaluate investments. And we need to get input along the way, but it's all iterative. It is not, you know, this is not going to be inked. This needs to be able to adapt itself, right?
So we're seeing this as a way to develop a process that can bring in all the, you know, we're at a, we're not at a 30,000 foot level, but we're at a high level, and all these lower level, we're developing a process to bring in the lower level activities to make a big metropolitan water district understanding. Is that?
I mean, that's part of it. We also do need to decide what we're going to invest in and when, right? So we have a responsibility to deliver our core mission. But I do also think that Metropolitan and our member agencies like West Basin and others have a lot of capacity and experience to be able to inform the region and how we make decisions collectively. And as resources, not only in terms of water, but also in terms of financial resources are limited, any way that we can work collaboratively and co-invest and co-plan and co-create, that's the type of model I think that, the general manager, and from what I've heard, that the board wants to see.
Well, what runs through my mind is the water replenishment district, which has a huge impact on the Met, and how they're not a Met agency, and so how do we deal with something like that?
That's a good question. I mean, Pure Water, I think, is a really good example of where we've brought in,
Yeah, of course.
right, agencies that are critical to our success, but aren't necessarily our member agencies. And so I think that is an example in a lot of ways of the type of thinking and collaboration that we're going to need to do, beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Other questions or comments? I see Jennifer in the back from our staff.
Jennifer with West Basin. I just had a question. So working with the South Bay cities, council governments, they're very involved in climate action planning for the cities.
Yeah.
So how much detail, you posted the comments within the slides, as far as sending those out, how much detail would you like to hear from all of those individual cities that have done that work with, utilizing their climate action plan, putting together and identifying different, I guess,
Vulnerabilities.
yeah, out there that you included in the slide. So what level of detail would you like to see down to that level? I know you mentioned that you're starting kind of up higher. Is that something that's appreciated at this time, or are you waiting for the process to kind of roll through and finish up?
I mean, it's a really good question. We are starting with our member agencies, but I'm certainly hearing how, and I agree how important it is that we figure out a process to kind of filter up from your members as well. And specifically when it comes to vulnerabilities, that's critically important, I think, for all of us to understand where there are particular vulnerabilities that have been identified. And some of those may not be from areas that are even connected to the Met system, right? I mean, we know that there's a lot of groundwater issues in the region, and they're not necessarily connected to Met. But they may desire a connection to Met if they can't figure out, their groundwater infrastructure. And so is there a strategy around that as a region to build resilience for everyone within our service area? So, I'm certainly really open to figuring out a process to do that. I am pretty familiar with the South Bay cities, the COG, their climate action work, and it's phenomenal. They've been a great example for their cities, and so I would love to talk about how we can work with them. And I actually presented some of this at the in person at they had their big regional meeting recently.
Great question. Anybody else? Go ahead, EJ.
I just have one quick question. On, I think it was slide 8, or I guess slide 9, you talked about the additional efforts going on. And I had a question about how Met is analyzing those current efforts with the microscope of the resilience, reliability, financial sustainability, and affordability. And we have a great example, you touched on it, Pure Water, and how we move forward with that project. The EIR is underway. Do you see that with the adoption of this plan in the future, that could change kind of our view of what Pure Water would look like, where that water would go, or how do you see those as being interrelated?
I feel like I would make them very nervous if I answered this question.
That might be why I asked it. I wanted to hear your thoughts because they are interconnected. And when you talk about sustainability, you think about water supply, but you also think about energy intensiveness and all of these different factors. And so I'm trying to, in my mind, look at this project that could provide so much benefit to the Met family and to Southern California, and at the same time look at it from this climate adaptation perspective.
Well, I mean, I'll just say that, we're really trying to start out this conversation around interests and needs and really, although there are obviously projects that are ongoing, instead of sort of starting with our positions on particular projects to say, okay, knowing what we know and the unpredictability of climate, what are we going to need? And, the board retreat there was so much conversation about storage, for example. And so I think that there's a real need for storage. And so when we start to develop criteria, we look at, are there storage opportunities that are, more climate resilient, more drought resilient than others? Is there like a level of control that we want to have? There's a financial element, there's an energy intensive element. So once we start to develop that criteria and we have, and I think, the study that's going on in our water resources group on storage will hopefully identify some options, and then we could evaluate those things, right? So that's kind of how I see the process going. And, I think, I don't know if you have anything to add, John.
Yeah, I think I would just add, EJ, that our board is taking kind of a very thoughtful way of moving forward, recognizing that there's low-hanging fruit out there that we know needs to be addressed. I would say with the 3-year drought that we've hopefully just passed through, the board has authorized five projects to kind of shore up our existing infrastructure to increase resiliency. So we're moving on those. We're moving on pure water, recognizing that we can do something. So we've started the programmatic EIR process. And it's not to say that the program as its vision now, that's what it's going to look like when it's completed. But we've started down that road because there are some important time-sensitive hurdles that you have to clear. And CEQA is one of them before you can really start putting any infrastructure in the ground. But recognizing that we want to build something that's adaptable to information that we get from Liz's work and other efforts that are going on. We'll be coming to the board later this year with a recommendation to award consulting agreements for desalination studies. Again, get some of that work done now so that we can move on things if that's the recommendation. We'll also have reservoir siting studies that are underway too. So we're getting a lot of that preliminary work going now with the expectation that we pivot and adapt to the information that comes out of Liz's efforts and other decisions that the board makes. But if you don't start, it's very difficult to catch up. So we feel being proactive is the right way to go right now.
Thank you.
Good, very good. Anything, Director?
I have kind of a simple question, which is analyzing new opportunities for CRA power supply. CRA power supply is going away. What does that mean? What does new opportunities mean?
Well, we have a power operations team in our ops group, and they have been exploring whether it's renewable energy, ideas like pumped storage,
So
adding to our.
isn't going to try to get more hydropower necessarily.
No, I think that, the challenge is that Hoover has historically, been 90% of our power.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I think we ought to push Sites Reservoir. But I do that every time.
He's talking about storage again, isn't it? Anybody else? Because I know we do have the other presentation, but anybody else? Let me also really quick close too, but I think, so the mention, by the way, was the word vulnerabilities, because what I was looking at when you were talking earlier, Liz, was we all understand what Director LeVay was saying to a degree, like the 30,000 foot level and the big Met thing. And yet, so there's the areas that you can or cannot control in the long run of the future as the behemoth in the region, okay? But you also have just the current situation. What I'm reminded of was when the Woolsey fire hit up in Malibu and Topanga, which is part of my area. And my understanding was that some of our pumps in that area were vulnerable. And that was a huge concern, right? So you have water coming into the system, but if pumps don't have power and, they can't get the water into the region even to do fire protection. So hopefully things like that are already on the radar screen in these conversations, because that's where I'm getting at, where a local city like a Malibu or District 29 or yes, up in Palos Verdes, there's any of these areas that they just they have the resources they've got. And so no matter where the water supply is coming from at the moment, if you can't even get it in there or have resiliency when a terrible situation happens, then we're in a very bad, scenario. So I already know that we dealt with that in the past, but that would be my example, that I think West Basin needs to be the conduit in this early conversation of our retailers and cities. That's on us, I agree. Metropolitan will have to figure out how to eventually dig deeper. But in the beginning, that's on, I believe it, the member agency. We need to do our due diligence and help be that conduit. And the same with, if it's Torrance, it's Independent, or it's Santa Monica. So I'm sure you're having the different discussions. But that's the example that came to my mind because that was a huge issue in those two communities up there. And I think the only other thing I wanted to ask, because I don't know the answer, are either of our two directors on any of these subcommittees or anything in this conversation? I don't know the org structure.
I believe that Director Alvarez is on the subcommittee.
Got it. Okay, so you definitely have someone from us firsthand there too. Okay. Excuse me. So, all right, well, thank you so much. Good conversation. And of course, offline, we can make sure we get you everything you need. So you have what you need to do this good work. Next, I also know we do have another very important discussion here today that we have been extremely interested in this locality, and that is the Pure Water Southern California program. So with that, I'll let EJ introduce this item, please.
Yes, thank you, President Houston. And as you just noted, this program and project is crucial, I think, to West Basin's future. I want to thank all of our engineering and operations team, as well as our other staff that's here today because of the importance of this. For this presentation, we do have Bruce Chalmers, the program manager, and John Bednarski, the chief engineer and group manager of engineering services at Metropolitan Water District. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, President Houston and West Basin for letting us present on our program today. We're going to provide an update of where we are, and I will start and then John will finish up. Next slide. With a program this large and complex, it takes a lot of partners. The Metropolitan, as we just discussed, Metropolitan can't do this by ourselves. So our major partner is the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. They'll be providing the source water for the program. And then we have LOIs or agreements with all of the agencies that are shown on this slide. So in addition to the agreement we have with LA County San, we have LOIs with a number of our member agencies, including West Basin. And that includes also some of those LOIs include the groundwater basins managers, WRD, and the San Gabriel Basin Water Master. And there's basically two types of LOIs. One LOI is more demand oriented, where a member agency has an interest in taking water from the Pure Water program. And then there's also types of LOIs that are concerned more with just coordination, where they may not have water demands, but they might share facilities, or we might use their facilities. And that's agencies like Edison and LA County Department of Public Works, the Corps of Engineer for right-of-way. And you see the San Gabriel Valley Water District, they are not a member agency, but as we'll discuss, they have some facilities that we're coordinating with them to share to reduce some of the needs for building new facilities. The last thing on this slide is you'll see that there's 3 Colorado River agencies, and we have LOIs with them to discuss water exchanges or whatever on the Colorado River. where they're interested in partnering with Metropolitan to help solve some of those issues on the Colorado River. And they are actually contributing financially to our CEQA phase. Next slide. This gives an overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'll do the first 3 bullets and then John will finish up. So we'll start with the project overview, program overview. Next slide. This slide shows a schematic of the facilities. You'll see at the bottom left is LA County Sanitation District's Joint Water Pollution Control Plant. That will be the location for our advanced water treatment plant. The blue line is what we call our backbone pipeline. It's an 84-inch pipe. It goes from the Carson area up into the Azusa area above the Santa Fe Dam. You'll also see the dashed circles along the way. Those are potential locations for indirect potable reuse facilities. They would be injection wells in the West Coast Basin and in the Long Beach area. And then the other areas would be existing, new or modified recharge basins, mostly owned and operated by LA County Sanitation District. The brownish orange line at the top is schematic to show a connection from our backbone pipeline to Metropolitan's Weymouth Water Treatment Plant. That would be for direct potable reuse. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And then there's an existing pipeline from Weymouth to our Deemer plant so that we can also do a direct potable reuse there as well. And there's an existing connection to Orange County. Next slide. So the program is 150 million gallons per day. It'll be in 2 phases. This slide shows the first phase. In the first phase, we'll construct the backbone pipeline and 115 million gallons per day of treatment at our advanced water treatment plant. And progress to the animation. And this includes approximately 90 million gallons a day for indirect potable reuse. That would be for groundwater augmentation or for industrial uses. And next slide. Yeah, and then you'd see then that allows for 25 MGD of DPR. And that 25 MGD is determined 2 ways. The current, what it looks like for the regulations that come out later this year, if you're under 10% of your water plant flow, there's a lot less requirements in terms of additional treatment. So our minimum daily flows to our 2 treatment plants, Weymouth and Deemer, is about 250 MGD. So 10% is 25 MGD. That also happens to be the capacity of a pipeline that the San Gabriel Valley Water District owns. It's an existing pipeline. It brings recharge water into the canyon spreading grounds, which is that top dashed circle. Because it's Northern California water, as you know, during the drought, it's been tough to get recharge water. So by them taking water from the Pure Water program, then they don't need the pipeline that goes from basically about a mile from Weymouth to their existing recharge basins. So we're going to pump the water the other direction, essentially. And that allows us not to have to build about an 11-mile pipeline as part of phase 1 to save costs.
Pipeline was that again?
Pardon?
Whose pipeline was that again?
San Gabriel Valley.
San Gabriel Valley's is called the Azusa pipeline.
Mhm.
And I believe it's a 36-inch, either 30 or 36.
And they're a state
pipe.
water contractor.
The 90 MGD for IPR may not be all of the potential IPR requirements. We are having continued conversations with West Basin and LADWP, LA San, WRD, and a number of other agencies with a group called the LA Reuse Collaborative. And so we are having a lot of discussions on coordinating between our program and the City of LA's Operation Next program, some of the work that you all are doing. So the amount we have for phase one is 90 MGD. How that's split up, but both on a total capacity and a time-based capacity, is still being negotiated. And so that's what's going to go into CEQA. There may be some changes to that as we move forward. Next slide. In phase two, go ahead and push the, there you go. So in phase two, we add from 115 to 150 MGD. Basically, that's AWT capacity in Carson. The backbone pipeline is already finished, but it will require a second pipeline from the backbone to Weymouth to handle the extra flows. And that could either be the extra 35 and we continue to use the Azusa pipeline, or it may be a brand new pipeline at 60 MGD. Next slide. To summarize our recent board actions, as John mentioned, we're trying to be proactive. In December, we went to the board and the board authorized the acceptance of an $80 million funds from the state. And the good news is we think we have that. It was wired on Friday. And basically we were waiting for that before we started any of the work that was projected to be included in that $80 million. Some of the work that is being included in that, in January, we went to the board for authorization of a consulting agreement with a joint venture of AECOM, Brown and Caldwell to be the program manager. And so we have a contract with them and we're finalizing their first task order this week now that we can actually spend some of those funds. The other thing that's an early start in that is 2 consulting agreements for the first 2 reaches of the backbone pipeline. And we'll talk about the details of that a little bit. That basically gets us from Carson through the city of Lakewood. And also at the March board meeting, the board supported our application for a USBR grant. West Basin and other agencies provided support letters. So thank you for that. And we'll find out sometime this summer whether we were accepted. One of the sources of funding is the federal infrastructure bill, which included $450 million in large-scale reuse funds. John will talk about some details of that. But one of the requirements is a feasibility study, and that the USBR grant was set up to help agencies like Metropolitan have some funding to prepare those feasibility studies. Next slide. Also new to Metropolitan, in January 1st, we have authorization now through legislation last year to include alternative delivery approaches. Historically, we've been limited to design, bid, build, but now we have authority to do design, build, progressive design, build, and CMGC. And so one of the first tasks from our program manager will be to look at all the projects that are going to be required for Pure Water, to define them, and then help us determine what type of implementation delivery approach we're going to use. Next slide. Some of our recent project team activities. We're working on the environmental documentation. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. We're refining the conveyance or backbone pipeline alignments. We've, as I mentioned, we have a contract now with the program manager and the preliminary design consultants for the first two reaches. We're revising the schedule, and we're continuing our collaboration with stakeholders. We've performed some modeling in coordination with West Basin, looking at how to move water from pure water into West Basin's existing system and what, if anything, new is required to be able to, for West Basin to be able to take that water. We're working with LADWP to help coordinate Operation Next, and I mentioned the Reuse Collaborative. And we're also working with the city of Long Beach. They have some asks that they would like in terms of they have some pipes that need to go under the same rivers and freeways that we're going under. So we're looking at if there's any synergy there. And John will talk about the continuing outreach activities. Next slide. So in terms of CEQA, the notice of preparation was distributed on September 30th. We had our scoping meetings from September into November and received comments. And so the next milestone is the draft EIR. So we're doing all the studies and backup work that it takes to write that draft EIR. The projected timeline for that is the first quarter of 2024, with the comments during the summer and the EIR finalized in the fall of 2024. Next slide. And lastly, this shows those first two reaches that we're starting preliminary design on. The blue line is basically in the city of Carson. One of their asks is that it would be out of the street by 2028 because they have some Olympic venues in their city. So to meet that deadline, we needed to start early. So that's why the preliminary design for that is starting. We do have approval for that alignment from the city council. And then the reach 2 is through the cities of Long Beach and Lakewood. We also have either final or tentative approval with those cities. And so the risk of redo in work in those areas is pretty low. So Metropolitan was willing to start that preliminary design as well. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. Key to this program is the treatment process itself that's going to be located down at the joint plant. And in an effort to get better definition around that process, Metropolitan commissioned our demonstration plant in 2019. And I'm hopeful that most, if not all of you, have had a chance to go out there. And I just have some good news. We're back open for in-person tours. So if any of you or your constituents would like to get out there, just connect with Metropolitan through our website and we can get in-person tours arranged again. So that's great news. One of the goals of the demonstration plant was really to refine the treatment process. And as many of you know, we're looking at using the membrane bioreactor as a pre-treatment to the reverse osmosis. We saw there were two ways that we could do that. We could either use the treated secondary effluent from the joint plant or use primary effluent. We've completed testing on the secondary effluent. It's the process that we call tertiary MBR, and we far exceeded the pathogen removal credits that we needed to get. So we have a high degree of confidence in that process. And what we're doing now is going back and treating the primary effluent, it's called secondary MBR, and see what kind of results we get from that. We're also doing some additional testing with the South Coast AQMD. We do have off-gassing from the reactor basins, and we'll need a permit in order to operate those basins. So we've got to get some baseline data on that. And I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about working with our independent science advisory panel. This is an important step in order to get regulatory approval, was to develop an independent science advisory panel and to engage them in the testing process. Next slide. So one of the key things that's important to us and understanding, and again, this goes back to a lot of the information that we received from West Basin, was the importance of having a very competent nitrogen removal process in front of the RO process to avoid membrane fouling. So we're going after this in conjunction with LACSD, looking at 2 different areas in the treatment process that we can remove nitrogen. One will be back in the joint plant treatment process itself, taking a look at some of the centrate, the waste centrate that gets recirculated back into their treatment process, and looking at nitrogen removal back in the JWPCP. We're also looking at nitrogen removal within the AWT facility itself, and this is where the membrane bioreactors and the biological process that precedes those membranes comes into play. So the removal of the nitrogen, not only from fouling of the membranes in the RO process, but also in order to meet groundwater basin plans, we have to have a certain nitrogen content in our water coming out of the plants in order to, make the water suitable for either groundwater replenishment or blending with surface water supply. So we've got active studies going on in that area at the demonstration plant. Next slide. So as I said, we've got some baseline testing that's being completed. We're looking at again, at the tertiary MBR process. We're optimizing the operation of the tertiary MBR process. And we're looking at modifications now to the demonstration plant as we go forward and wrap up some of the early testing. We've identified areas that we want to go back and do some additional testing. So we'll be recommending to our board making some modifications to the demonstration plant that will give us that continuing testing flexibility going forward. Next slide. As Bruce mentioned, we are looking at direct potable reuse as part of the program now, and we're adjusting the programmatic EIR to address that. And we're also very well aware that the state of California is developing DPR regulations, both for what we call raw water augmentation, which is the approach that Metropolitan is recommending right now, but also for treated water augmentation. That would include and allow us to take output from the pure water program and perhaps put it directly into Metropolitan's treated water pipeline. So we're aware that those 2 different types of regulations are being developed by the state. As Bruce mentioned, drafts of those regulations will come out the middle of this year. We'll expect there'll be one more opportunity to make comments on those. And then the regs will be finalized, and the state is committed to finalizing those regulations by the end of the year. So by the end of the year, we'll have very clear guidance on both of those types of DPR application. Metropolitan will be working with the state, at least initially, as far as raw water augmentation goes, identifying what we think are viable treatment process trains and developing test plans that will validate those process trains. And much of that work is already underway at the demonstration plant right now. We've been actively engaging with DDW for the last 7 or 8 years. They've participated in all of our ISAP review meetings, so they're very well aware of what we're doing and what our plans are. And they're on board with our approach to gaining regulatory approval for DPR applications for our program. Next slide. We've also, as I mentioned, established what we call an independent science advisory panel. We've had 6 workshops now, most recently towards the end of March. We had our 6th workshop. And at that meeting, they reviewed the secondary MBR results and got some feedback on our approach to nitrogen management from tertiary MBR. And we've also presented our approach for direct potable reuse again. And they're in concurrent with recommending that we begin the program with raw water augmentation as the way to garner support for direct potable reuse. We continue to have these meetings. DDW attends these meetings with us, so we believe that we've been fully transparent with the regulators on our approach moving forward. Next slide. Bruce mentioned we've received funding from the state. So we're very grateful for getting that $80 million, which will allow us to jumpstart the program. The funds can only be used for design. That was one of the stipulations. So until we have CEQA completed, we're not going to be able to move into construction. We are pursuing federal funding. We've put in a request for a $5 million grant through WaterSmart. And this grant will allow us to fund what we call a feasibility study. Once that feasibility study is in place, we'll then be able to apply for the large scale water reuse funding. And Bruce mentioned that also. There's a pot of $450 million that could be available to us, Metropolitan, but we've got to get this feasibility study completed first. So that's going to be one of the early activities, as Bruce mentioned, that our consultant will be assisting us with. Next slide. Outreach for the program continues. Hopefully that's very visible to West Basin and your member agencies. Again, we're basically at your disposal to provide any types of information that you feel that your community may need about the Pure Water program. Again, either through tours or other educational opportunities that we have. We have a great deal of information on our website at Metropolitan. So please encourage your member agencies to avail themselves of the resources that Metropolitan has available through these outreach programs. Next slide. We're very engaged in industry outreach, both through the research that we're doing at the demonstration plant, and also now as we're moving our way towards design and construction, we want to start engaging with the outside consulting world and also the contractor community. So in February, we had our MetWorks Industry Day, and I want to thank West Basin for participating in that event. If you could go to the next slide. Big event, had nearly 400 individuals in participation. As I mentioned, West Basin had a booth there along with LA County Sanitation District, DWR, had keynote speaker from our general manager, and a couple of our directors were also there. It was very well received. We're going to be taking this event on the road. Our next event will be in the middle of the year, and we're going to take it out to the Inland Empire as a way, again, to continue to stimulate interest in Metropolitan's projects, not only for Pure Water, but for our entire CIP, of really generating more industry support, both from consultants and contractors. Next slide. And I'm just going to kind of wrap this up with our overall program schedule. You can see, as Bruce mentioned, we'll be wrapping up CEQA at the end of next year. We're starting design activities now and anticipate that construction will start at the end of 2025 and then run through 2032 with the plant operational at that point and the facilities, delivering water. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you for the opportunity to present today, and happy to answer between Bruce and I any of your questions. Thanks, EJ.
Thank you very much, both of you. Any questions or comments? I'm going to open it up. Director LeFay.
Thank you, Chair. So I actually have two questions. One is the difference between phase one and phase two is how many million gallons per day we're going to crank out. What are we changing to go from 25 to 60?
So phase one would be 115, phase two would be a total of 150, so 35 more. So that would include increasing the capacity at the advanced water treatment plant in Carson. And it would also include building a second pipeline or a pipeline that could carry all 60. The biggest thing about going from the 10% from basically 25 to 60 is that the regs will require a process called ozone biological activated carbon that's before the RO. So that would be at the joint plant, and that's a significant cost. It's probably about $1 billion just for that. So part of our pilot testing and demonstration testing, we're going to look at alternatives to that. And if something works, we would propose to the state an alternative, which hopefully would be less of a cost impact. But that's why with under 10%, we don't have to do all that. More than 10%, we have to do a whole lot more. So that's why it's
a lot of different. I looked at it and I thought going from 25 DPR to 60 DPR will just add more, but it's a really complicated.
Yeah.
And my other question is not shown on here, and it's either you or the West Coast. WRD is doing a whole desal of the West Basin, and somebody's got to put treated water into the to replace that, and I don't see it here. And is West Basin doing it or who's
Back
doing
to
it?
Slide 5.
Slide 6.
5 or 6, yeah, same, shows the same thing.
They show the same thing. You got a circle at the, just outside the plant.
And that would be for WRD and replenishment for the Taurus desalter. And they've kind of changed the name a little bit. It's inland recharge or something like that, rather than replenishment
So-
water.
So we're doing it, not the West Basin. You can do it either way, I think, but
So Metropolitan is building the backbone facilities, and we'll have a connection to West Basin for that water. And it's up to West Basin and WRD to coordinate who does it and where it goes.
okay. But, okay, so we expect to see injection wells in that circle.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just, EJ.
I'm very aware of the time, so I want to touch on that very briefly. We are in conversations with the Metropolitan Water District Water Recycling Coordinated Group, along with the City of Torrance, as well as the Water Replenishment District. So it is a coordinated effort. And so I want to say thank you to all three of our guests because you've all been very active in that working group. But I wanted to touch maybe a little bit on what the director just mentioned. In the EIR, when you contemplate the 90 MGD for IPR, I know that there are no agreements completed. We do have the LOIs, which West Basins is a coordinated effort. LOI does not have a water quantity there. But in the EIR documents, what are you contemplating as far as that 90 MGD?
You know, I'll have to get back to you on the exact language of it, but it's identified. I think that it was in the presentation Matt provided to the reuse collaborative that I think you were there. That's the excuse me, the latest detail. It had, don't quote me, it's like 20 MGD for West Basin, 10 MGD for LADWP in that West Coast Basin area. And I think there was a 4 or 5 for Long Beach as well.
So with the 20, and this goes back a little bit to my question about the climate adaptation plan. West Basin had the opportunity to participate in LADWP and LA Sanitation's discussions related to Hyperion. And as they were showcasing what they intended to utilize that water for, a number of the stakeholders that were engaged in that, and I could just quote one because I know that he would be okay with it, Bruce Resnick. And he really asked LA to focus on utilizing that water locally to move that water up and out of the basin and the area would be problematic in his mind. Does the EIR contemplate that as far as maximizing the use of that water locally, or is the 90-25 in the first phase, is that kind of what you're contemplating now?
Well, I think we're trying to provide ourselves with flexibility. I mean, you're right, EJ. Nobody signed a water sales agreement with us. So I think that we are trying to provide a program that's going to be flexible as we get closer to making deliveries and we actually enter into agreements with folks. But we also see that there's a large value in getting the water up to our water treatment plants, both the Deemer and the Weymouth plant, because we can really broaden the reach of this water being delivered down to Orange County throughout our entire central pool, which, you know, may or may not be the case if we just, you know, put a lot of that water into the ground right around the plant. So, I mean, I want to just leave the message that we're completely open to working with you. And if the numbers that you feel you need to make your program work are larger than what we originally envisioned, let's have a dialogue about that and talk about where the water can best be used. I mean, we're going through a CEQA process that's going to be large. It's going to be at a programmatic level. And, you know, the actual details of how it gets built, you know, are going to come from future discussions with agencies like yours and others.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Anybody else with questions? Director Gray, are you still there? you have any questions or comments? Anybody else? I see Anatole left. So you know what? I just have a couple things and I'll probably be a little rapid fire because I know we gotta get moving here. We have another meeting behind this, but handful of things. Number one, remind me again, how much wastewater is coming through the Carson plant? How much is it?
It's about, I'm going to say 264 average daily flow. So the most we can take is not really based on average, it's based on minimum, right? So currently the minimum is somewhere in maybe the 180s, maybe a little more. So if you took a flow today, we might be able to get more than 150. But I think probably most everybody knows the state's looking at reducing or has reduced the internal, the house GPDs. And so when you do that, you end up with less wastewater. So we've kind of come up with about 150 as being the most we can get out of it right now. So we'll mention the possibility of a little more in the EIR, but right now 150 is a sure thing, even with the reductions.
Okay, yeah, I just didn't know offhand how much comes through that facility. And what is the projected cost right now of phase 1 and phase 2?
So we're updating our cost numbers now and we're working with our finance office. So I think what we're comfortable talking about is it was originally in 2018 $3.4 billion for the 150 MGD. I think everyone recognizes that prices have increased greatly in the last nearly 6 years since that estimate was put together. So as we're working through our numbers and also with our treatment consultants and our pipeline consultants, we're getting better clarity on what those numbers are now. And so it's our goal to be able to, get new numbers out by the end of this year, but expect it to be more than 3.4 billion.
Gotcha. No, because it's just good to even understand some ballpark. And so I know too, what is the mileage or the distance of this pipeline that goes all the way up to San Gabriel?
It's about 40 miles to the Santa Fe Dam, which is that second circle from the top. It's about another 5 to 10 miles to well, no, it's got to be less than that. It's another number of miles up to the the canyon spreading grounds, but it'll be a smaller diameter pipe. And it's about 11 miles from Santa Fe Dam to Weymouth.
No, very good. Look, I can tell you, and especially where we live, I mean, it's right here in our backyard. It's extremely exciting. I think that for those who do know about it and understand, it is exciting and it's ambitious. And I'm really glad to see that it has progressed so quickly at Metropolitan versus a number of other things that we've all been discussing. So just, want to applaud Metropolitan for this. In our strategic planning and thinking here at West Basin, it is well noted how fast this is coming together. And we are extremely interested, as you probably know, in looking at some opportunities. And I know that our two directors will, of course, advocate on behalf and working with our staff. One of the things that I wanted to ask our staff to do this because I think, and I don't know if we've done it in a while, but I think it would be a good opportunity for West Basin to potentially lead a group of our cities at some point, maybe more toward late summer, early fall, to see if we can get some of our electeds and locals and leadership to come down and do a tour of the plant. Because I haven't been down there in a while and things have moved really quickly. And yes, it's back in person again, but I think it really behooves us to make sure, a lot of our local electeds and other people in leadership in the South Bay go down and West Basin can help lead that effort. So, I'd ask that we do that. And I think that the suggestion working with the COG, of course, and other groups in our area are really smart and tremendous. So all that being said, gentlemen and Liz, thank you so much for your presentations. The great thing about this, by the way, these meetings get posted on our website. So people who couldn't be here can tune in. I do think it's imperative that we continue, and when I say we, meaning West Basin, because this is our local area, that we continue to do our best to talk about this project so that the residents and businesses in the area understand it. It's tremendously exciting. And I do one last question. Is there anything at this type of level that's being looked at in other parts of the United States or, around the globe right now? I mean, this is a really big potential reuse project.
Well, I would say that San Diego is well underway with their reuse program. You're all aware of Operation Next at the city of Los Angeles. I believe there's efforts up in Northern California too.
Okay.
I'm less familiar with maybe moving kind of eastward in the United States, but yeah, we're excited about it. And, I just want to reiterate, we really appreciate your support. I mean, it was your prior general manager, Greg Reed, that brought us together in this water reuse collaborative that we've now got well established between the city of LA and some of the agencies in this area that are really allowing us to think out of the box in collaborative ways to, really join these two major programs that are going to be underway. So, thank you for kind of bringing that to the forefront. And, we really enjoy working with your staff. And like I said, we've got certain flexibilities built into this, but we feel that getting through the programmatic EIR is a really critical step that we need to accomplish. But we're happy to work with you.
Good. Well, excellent. Well, thank you. And yes, Southern California right here leading the charge, right?
There you go.
Amen.
These regulations that are coming down the pike and everything else going on. It's an exciting time to be in our industry, if you will. But yet the necessity's there. So very exciting. Director Gray, did I hear you on the phone?
I'm still here. Thank you.
Okay. Did you have any questions or comments?
Oh, just comments. Thank you to everyone for the presentation, the update on Pure Water Project. It's exciting. So thank you to the gentleman who presented today. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Director Gray. And I know we went a little over everyone, but I appreciate those who are here. I want to thank Metropolitan, of course, for coming down in person and giving us these presentations. I'm going to move along into by the way, I'll note that Director Deere is now here. So Director Deere is present. Director comments or future agenda items. Director Gray, do you have anything?
No, thank you. Very good meeting today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Deere.
No comments, thank you.
I have already pretty much said everything I need to say. I want to say thanks again. Our next scheduled meeting is on June 7th, 2023. And so with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You guys had lunch?